Well, cheers to the 6 o'clock hour, my friends. I'm not sure which time zone all of you are in. You are all welcome to stay either without your video or with your video. It's always good to see your beautiful faces and see some reactions, so definitely feel free to turn it on. Love to see how many amazing designers we have out there in this community. Just always impressed every day with all of us and the work we do and how dedicated we are and how hard we work to better ourselves and better our communities. So it's just really glad, I'm really glad to have you guys all here. Oh, look, there's some familiar faces too. Hey guys. Hopefully Radhika will be joining us shortly.
Hey Stephanie. Hey everyone.
Hi.
Hey Radhika.
Hi. This is my clingy cat, Bella. She has to be on my shoulder all day long. It's been great. It's been great working from home.
That does not look like a cat. It looks like a scarf. Oh, it moves.
Yeah.
It's alive.
It's alive. It's alive. She's always alive. All right. We will get started here shortly. So what I was saying was, please feel free to join on your, to turn on your video. It's good to see your faces and for all of us to kind of get a feel, but for those of you who are shy and don't want to, don't feel like you have to. But it is great to kind of get to see all of you as we get to sit and talk. So we kind of put this together today to kind of talk everybody through the anatomy of a UX resume and portfolio. And I just want to preface this with, there are a billion people's opinions about all of these things. So there's not one right way to do any of this. So take it for what it's worth, learn from it, gather from it what makes sense to you, but don't feel like this is something that is like, you have to take verbatim and start from scratch. This is just guidelines and whatnot. There's actually, I see some faces out there of some people that I've gotten to spend some one-on-one mentoring time with. I do have mentoring through adplist.org. /mentors. So if you're looking for some one-on-one time to go over resumes and portfolios, please feel free to book some time with me there. I would love to help any of you that are looking for it. So to get started, I'm Stephanie Krell, and it's been a fucking hard year, guys. My God. I moved to San Diego back in November, took a risk, and then lost my job and ended up in the West Coast all alone in the middle of a quarantine. It's been tough, and it took me 4 months to find a new job, and and I've got a pretty impressive resume. So it's a tough world out there. And, you know, props to all of you who are trying so hard, you know, to figure this out. And so I'm going to do a quick introduction of the three of us, and then kind of go through my story and the anatomy of a resume. And then I'm going to sort of hand it off to Chanin and then Radhika, and we're going to kind of give you guys some thoughts and insights. But what we'll do first is sort of tell you a little bit about who we are, what role we're in now, and then I'll go through my story and the resume stuff. So I'm Stephanie Krell, and right now I am the interim director of CX strategy for DMI, which is based out of Washington, D.C., where at least this office is. They're a global company of about 3,000 people, mostly consulting in the sort of commercial space. They also have a federal practice, which is why they're also based out of Washington, D.C. But I am also in talks with a couple other companies because right now I'm still just interim, filling a hole while I am sitting in my parents' basement helping my mom through hip replacement surgery, which is just a load of fun. But everything happens for a reason, and I'm here to be able to help take care of her. So, and my background a little bit, I was in the media industry for about 12 years got a master's degree, pivoted, went into theme parks. I started off at Walt Disney and then went into Universal Studios, where I built some virtual reality roller coasters, and then came into consulting for human-centered design. And I consider myself a human-centered design specialist with kind of expertise in service design, design thinking, and design strategy. Shannon?
Hey guys, I'm Chanin Knight. Currently I'm a UX strategist and UX lead for Vanguard. So for that investment firm, I am basically leading a suite of design, I should say, for a suite of internal products for internal high stakes internal users. And so I'm on a daily basis, I'm leading research, discovery research, as well as usability research, workshops, wireframing, prototyping, the gamut. I started my career in news media as well. I was a visual designer and a web designer for Atlantic Media and 2 publications within Atlantic Media, both Government Executive, which is their more like B2B business publication, as well as National Journal, and transitioned from that to consulting. I consulted in the federal space, so I worked on sites like sec.gov and actually several SEC websites, and then went to Accenture and Fjord, and that's where I met these lovely ladies, and ended up leading design for, among other things, conversational design for a chatbot that's now part of the website for the federal student aid website, which is studentaid.gov. So if you happen to have federal student loans and you log into the FSA website, studentaid.gov, and you see a little owl pop up at you, I designed the UI and the conversation there. So yeah, I'll be talking today about portfolio, tips and tricks, and just sharing what I've learned through my career, both in presenting portfolios as well as reviewing portfolios from like a hiring manager standpoint.
Shannon, or Radhika, my dear?
Hi everyone, my name is Radhika Bhatt. I'm so excited to just see how many people are here. There's 100 people on the line, like that's amazing. Thanks for spending your evening with us. So a little bit about myself. My entire career has been in government and kind of in the civic tech space, and kind of happened unexpectedly. So my background, like my undergrad degree, was in media arts and design, so I kind of learned how to code and design at the same time. And when I came out of college, UX design was just like, the field was bursting. Like it was the hot word, like it was everywhere. There were so many like jobs that just listed UX design, even though maybe they didn't really know what it was. So when I came out of college, I kind of saw an opportunity in UX design to kind of combine the expertise that I had in terms of coding and design. And so my first job was at the Department of Commerce. I kind of found myself there unexpectedly. Again, like didn't really have my eyes on government, didn't really know that I would end up there, but that was my first job. And I ended up working with a group called the Commerce Data Service, which if anyone is familiar with US digital services or kind of the civic tech environment in government, pretty much my team was almost like an internal consultancy within the Department of Commerce that served all the different agencies under Commerce. And so we worked on products like data science tools. I did a lot of UX design in terms of redesigning government websites to just become more user-friendly in general. And I was exposed to a lot of just different types of work in government and how difficult doing design can be in government, especially when it comes to research and trying to convince different stakeholders that, no, we need to do research instead of just assuming that this is what the experience is like or this is what people need. So that was really like my foray into UX design. And I also took a general assembly course to kind of tidy up those skills as well. So through that, I kind of just got to learn a little bit more about the ecosystem within government. And since then, I've worked in a couple different places, but I also worked at Accenture, at Fjord with Stephanie and Chanin. That's how we met, as Chanin said. And the experience there was also really unique of being outside of government, but still doing government work. And again, just, having such a large team of UX designers, service designers, and seeing how you can serve different types of government agencies with that work was really interesting. And then I found myself back in government. So currently I'm with the US Census Bureau, and I'm deputy director of an innovation program called the Opportunity Project. And what we do actually, this is kind of a shift in what I did before. Previously, I was doing UX design, front-end development, service design in all the different places that I mentioned. And now I'm doing more of program management. And so what that really looks like, and kind of what I've been able to translate my skills into, is really the fact that human-centered design and UX design really applies to everything, not only technology, not only designing websites or apps. It applies to how you interact with people. It applies to how you deliver services. It applies to how you, just run a federal program that interacts with hundreds of stakeholders around the country. So that's kind of how I've translated my skills, and the work that we're doing right now focuses on how do we bring together technologists, government, and communities around the country to build technology that's solving public-facing challenges. And so I manage all the programmatic areas of that, including bringing together different stakeholders, finding the technologists, the companies that build these different tech products, and actually running a 12-week sprint cycle similar to an accelerator program, where we're actually facilitating the creation of these different tech products that are tackling different challenges. And so we've looked at things like youth homelessness, the opioids crisis, disaster response, and this year our challenges are focusing on the natural and built environment. So I would say that, my skills in the past have focused, and my experience in the past has focused on UX design, but I've found a way to kind of translate that into a different career path. And again, I'm just really excited about government work and civic tech in general. So happy to talk more about that. And yeah, really excited to join the conversation. I have some examples of like good portfolios and resumes that I'm going to share later. So just excited to connect with everyone.
Great. Thank you guys so much. So I think, just to get started, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on my story, and like not like my necessarily like the details of my career, but like my story. I was saying that I was part of media, and I transitioned into this field, and it was not an easy transition. Back when I was doing this, which was about 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of mentors, and there was nobody to talk to, and there was no one to ask, and nobody really wanted to be there for you. Nobody wanted to take the time. I can't tell you how many hundreds of LinkedIn requests I made, or informational interview requests, not even requests for a job, not even, like things like, will you look at my resume? Will you help me figure out this story I'm trying to tell? Can you look at my portfolio? What am I missing? And it was really hard to kind of find mentorship back then. And so I'm really glad to see different organizations like UX Coffee Hours and SDXD and ADPlist.org. And there's so many others like Service Design Network and et cetera. And they're out there and they're trying to pull these communities together, and it's really glad to see it. But I think what I want to say to you guys is that, it's really been my tenacity, resourcefulness, and resiliency that has gotten me through these last, 18 years of my career. I in the media field, I jumped into, I grew into a director role pretty quick. By 26, I was a director of 11 news publications, and I was teaching, and I ran my own business, and yada, yada. And I've always volunteered for Rape Crisis Center and Battered Women's Shelter. as well as different animal organizations. And so I've always kind of had this drive. But even then, I remember there being people in my career and in my life who told me I wasn't good enough, or that I would never achieve what I was hoping to, or that my dreams were too big, or that I was too big for my britches. And those are the worst. Those are the hardest people to overcome. And don't ever let anybody tell you what you can and cannot do. And don't listen to the people who are holding you back or not encouraging the dreams that you have for yourself. If you believe you can do it and you have the time and the energy to put forth to it, you can accomplish what you want. So that is my biggest message, I think, to everybody here, is just don't give up, and keep going. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of setbacks and pivots that I had to make. But you know, it was just figuring out how to get around each obstacle as it sort of showed up. And you know, the nice thing about having these communities is that there's all these people now that you can reach out to and ask for that kind of help. And all I ask of all of you is, as you continue to grow in your careers, pass it on, right? Be a mentor to others, find ways to give back, find time to make for other people, because it matters so much. As far as my resume, so kind of talking about resumes, I've had over 400 iterations of my resume from the time I started all of this until now. So in 18 years, I've created 400 different resumes. It sucked. Oh my God. And every time I have to redo it, freaking like die a little inside. I'm probably shriveled and mostly dead at this point. But a couple of things about that is, you know, as you guys continue moving forward, just remember, no one is looking out for you as well as you can look out for you. So you have your best interests at heart, and even mentors and friends and all these things, make sure that you are the person looking out for your best interests. And then a quick note, yes, resumes are the worst, and resilience 100%. Yes, absolutely. So the last thing I have to say that I wanted to touch on real fast before we go any further is LinkedIn. Guys, when you send a LinkedIn request to somebody, send a note, say hi, introduce yourself. Like I have like 33 requests that are just sitting in my inbox because I'm like, I don't know this person. Who is this person? They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't say hi. There's no way for me to go back and figure out, like, did I meet them from somewhere? Like, do yourself a favor. Say hello, tell them how you know them or how you found them or what you were just hoping to do with them. And you'll find more often than not, people will respond when you've given at least a brief introduction to say, hey, versus just clicking, you know, connect button. It makes it just a little bit easier especially for, you know, the person you're connecting with to remember, like if you message me a year later, then I know exactly kind of like when we connected and how that happened and who you were from the get-go. And I have that frame of reference. So important to stay on LinkedIn. There's a lot of good jobs there, lots of great ways to connect with people. If you've got a company in mind that you're really passionate about, do the best you can to meet as many of those people or connect with as many of those people as possible. That it always helps. So don't think it doesn't. All right, so I'm going to take a second and I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. All right, can everybody see it? Nod your heads. Yes, okay, great. So I'm going to go over just some basics here in terms of resumes. And I use my resume so you can kind of just see pieces and parts of it. And yes, I know my resume is very wordy, but in this case, I'm not much of a typical designer, right? So I don't create a lot of wireframes. I don't do a lot of visual design. I'm definitely strongly in the research strategy space. And at this point, mostly management. So I spend a lot more time working with KPIs and, business development and dollars and all that stuff than I do actually getting to care about customers anymore. But so length of a resume. If you don't have 8 to 10 years of an experience, you should probably keep your resume to about 1 page. And I know that seems crazy, but literally I have 18 years of experience and I just have a 2-page resume as of 2 months ago. So, I know it seems hard to figure out how to synthesize it and keep it into a small space, which is all, by the way, somewhat not true for federal, because federal does want a lot of information from you. So you may have to have a longer resume if you're looking for a federal job. Also, not the same thing as a CV. If you're looking to get into academia, those resumes are typically 4 to 6 pages. But that is usually inclusive of things like articles, publications, speaking engagements, etc., because they want all of those things involved too, which I think is also similar for the federal government. So probably a CV and a federal government application are probably very similar. But keep it compact. Keep your resume, your experience, your skill sets, all these things. You want it to be as minimal as possible and be able to make the most impact with as little as you can. Recruiters are going to, they get hundreds of resumes and they're going to scoot through resumes real quick. So you want your resume to stand out. You want to find a way for it to look good. And you want to keep it so it's pretty succinct. If you're sitting there with 3 years of experience and sending a 3-page resume, I guarantee you it's probably going in the trash. So also, addresses. I know it's an old school thing, but you don't need to put them on your resume anymore. Why? Because oftentimes jobs are becoming remote. The other part is that if you're living in one town and you're looking to get into another state, it's just easier if you don't really necessarily tell them where you're at, because then they can't make judgments about, local candidates versus non-local candidates. Don't waste the space. Moving into, I'm going to skip to 4 actually before I get to 3. Your resume needs to be about who you want to grow into, right? Yes, it needs to be reflective of what you've done, but it should be a reflection of where you're going. So think about what I want you to do is find a couple of job descriptions of that job, that next job. And your resume should reflect those things. It should be, these are the growth paths that I want to get into, right? If you're looking for something that has a lot of strategy in it, make sure that the resume you have right now reflects the strategy you've done. And then similar with your overview, right? So I have something called a professional overview rather than objective. It's important to write something unique about yourself. Like a lot of it, you'll see, dynamic global leader with blah, 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 blah. This is an opportunity for you to stand out, and also a section that doesn't have to be there. If you don't have room for it, don't include it. In this instance, because I'm in a management director level role, it's useful for me to give some information about like why me, right? But I haven't always had an overview or an objective in my resume. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But if you're gonna write one, write a good one. Don't just put it in there with some sentence that's meaningless. It should reflect something about you, something that you're passionate about, something that is particular, that catches someone's eye, right? So it should be more than just, some statement about this is a thing that I want to do. Let me see. Radhika and Chanin, will you pipe in if you see any questions pop up on the right? And just read them out to me. Thank you. Because I don't think I can see the chat while I'm in this space. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is your education, right? So your education and certificates, you need to include those especially if you're Agile certified, or if you have different kinds of skills or certifications, like you have a certification for 508 compliance. If you are sometimes Salesforce certified or Pega certified or whatever. There's different kinds of certifications. Good to include that stuff in a section that is easy to find. Skills. If you have a list of skills and it's like 20 skills long and it's just a listing of all of these things, it's hard to read. So break that stuff up. You can see that in my resume. I've broken, each kind of set of skills into a prioritized, like themed bucket of what I want people to know about me, right? So thinking about that job of the future, what are the themes in these jobs that you think are a priority to these recruiters? And then bucket your skills kind of in those themes that help get you to where you want to go. So if this job is research heavy, if it says research in the title and all you have is 2 things about research, you're probably going to get passed over. Research for typically a UX researcher includes everything from quantitative and qualitative, ethnography, contextual research, benchmarking, futurism, trends, etc. Right? If you don't have all that stuff in your skills list, there's a big question mark, right, in terms of what I'm looking at when I'm looking to hire a researcher. If you are a service designer, I want to see that you know certain methodologies, that you know frameworks, that you're very comfortable with not just research, but also strategy, how you put that data together, how you synthesize it, how you affinitize it, and how you turn it into maps and methodologies, and how you get it through a process from beginning to end. So take the time to really look through your skill set. You have to remember a lot of these resumes are being put through keyword searches. So if you don't have the requisite keywords that they're asking for in these job descriptions, your resume just won't make it to the next level. So most of the time, recruiters don't even see it until it's already gone through a word search. So your words that you have in your resume really, really matter. The next piece I want you guys to think about is a brag list. Make yourself a brag list. You should have 10 points about your career that are braggable. And I know as designers, it's really not in our typical nature to be very braggy. But if you wouldn't brag about it, it shouldn't be on your resume. Like, you don't want to see something that says, I conduct research for every project that I engage in, blah, 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 right? If that's like repeated in every job description you have, it's not very interesting, right? And it doesn't tell me anything about you. I assume through your skills list, which tells me that you're a researcher and tells me all the skills you have in research, that you do research. What I want to know is, what did you own? What were you good at? And what are you proud of? And so what I suggest is you make your brag list and then focus your content in your experience space around those brag points. It helps you think about what you need to include. And what you need to include when you're building your content. Speaking to that point, talking about your content. Usually what you'll see in an experience under each section is sort of like a, title, company, year. I only put years worked. I don't bother with months and specifics because, well, we all have things to hide on our resumes, let's be real. So I keep my years there, and then there's usually some kind of a summary, right? Like 1 to 2 sentences that sort of says, like, is a kind of braggable, this is kind of what I did here. And then 3 to 5 data points under that summary that are my brag points from each role. They should be built out like this: action, outcome, impact. I did this, that created this, and it was measured by this, okay? So it's important that you have that, right? If you're just like, I did this, okay, you did this, but why, or what, or like, so what, right? So think about it like that. Really set up your sentence structure to make sense, right? Like, you know, like not that this is necessarily braggy, but like well, maybe it is. I conducted 100, user interviews all by myself that helped me to come to a data point that served me to be able to create X thing. And that thing increased customer satisfaction by 45%, right? That is a structured sentence that has, what did I do? What came out of that? And how was it measured? Now, measurement can be everything from an actual percentage or a dollar to something less tangible if you don't have an exact measurement. But like, how did it impact the space that you were in? If you may not know, maybe you left the job, so you may not have a direct impact, but figure out what it is that's measurable about what that work was. All right. Back to the resume.
There was one question, Steph, about what do you think about the advice I heard once to have keywords in white, invisible to the eye on your resume to get through the automated first step?
I have done that before. I admit I've done that before. I didn't seem to help. So I'm not entirely certain. Never hurts to do that, I suppose. I'm not sure if I don't have the data to know whether or not that shows up in a keyword search or not. But I mean, if you can't fit it all in and you think it's important, definitely by all means stick it in there somewhere.
Yeah. And also to add to that, I mean, kind of related. So I've never done that, but also I think kind of piggybacking off of what you've been talking about, Stephanie, I think it's really important to also tailor your resume for every job that you're applying to. Like, you definitely don't want to take one and just send it out to a million places. And so I think that there's an element there of like, you can literally look at the job posting and like, if it's accurate and if it's true, I've done this where I've like taken a bullet point and put it in my resume if it's work that I've actually done. And so that way too, like when you're like, I'm also like, why hide those keywords? Like, just put them in your resume and put them up front. So, the recruiters can also see that too. And so I've found that to be really effective of, if you can see the keywords that are listed in a job description, whether it's for the requirements of skills or like specific expertise they're looking for, put those exact words in your resume. And it can also help recruiters that are actually reading through kind of just like quickly pick up that you have the skills as well.
Yep. Agreed. Now I have to say, I used to tailor my resume and I don't anymore, but I'm also at a director level. It's a little bit different because most director level jobs are looking for this, like the breadth of skill that I have at this point. So I don't tailor any longer, but I did. That's why I did 400 iterations of my resume. I mean, at this point I'm down to like just 2 this year, so it's not so bad. But used to tailor every single last one of them, including my objective to each and every company. So there's that.
Yeah. And Stephanie, we have a couple more questions coming in. Sure. Do you want to answer them now or should we do that later?
Tell them to hang tight and I'll get to them. I'm going to get through this list real fast and then I'll kind of address them.
Sounds good.
So on to this, which is your resume should look like you're a designer, right? Like, I can't even design a PowerPoint because I'm just not that good, but I have a designed resume and I have worked with designers to help me design my resume because I'm a designer and I'm in the design field. And if you're giving me a white resume that has no design element and doesn't look like it's been thought about in terms of layout and text and font, typography, icons, coloring, I'm probably going to question what kind of a designer you are. And especially when you're sort of in a space where they're looking for visual design, the design of your portfolio and the design of your resume matters. So don't think it doesn't. Also, for me, because I have a 2-page resume at this point, you'll see I have volunteering on the left. Depending on the amount of experience you have and if you're able to fit it into 1 page, showcasing a little about who you are as a person is never a bad thing. it's always good to show you have a personality or that you're dedicated to giving back to communities or whatever it is that you are passionate about in your life. And so I do encourage this if there's ever space and room. My project list, I've had a lot of feedback about it. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I think there's a lot of different ways to do a project list. I did mine very specifically this way for 2 points. Number one, I'm bragging about my clients and I'm bragging about my role. Those are the 2 pieces that I cared about the most in terms of what the point was of filling in this space, was talking about what role did I play and who was I playing it for. Some of you, it might be a little bit different if you even have room for a project list space. But this is not the one and only way to do it. I've seen a lot of people who've done it in multiple ways that may even be better, or more, exceptional than the space that I have mine in. But it was just specifically for the client list that I have. We sort of talked about resume and CV aren't the same thing. Publish, giving talks, presentations. If you do that stuff, you should definitely have a separate category for that. It's great to do it. Publish as much as you can, talk as much as you can, be a part of the community as much as you can. For those of you who are either changing careers or have done a lot of contracting and it looks like you're jumping a lot, or there's just a lot to kind of fill into a small space, or you're worried, or you're getting a lot of feedback from recruiters about why aren't you staying at one place very long, which is partially me. I haven't stayed anywhere longer than 2 years in a really long time. So yes, some of us have that problem. Let's talk about that in more detail at another time. Definitely find some time to talk to me. A lot of this is about telling your story and figuring out, if you've got a lot of contract work, you can kind of, section it all, or bundle it all up under like your business name, right? Give it a name, give it a logo, and say, contractor from this year to this year, and then list the client list that you have, and some of your major brag points, rather than kind of showcasing it each separately as sort of one jump to another. You can sort of show it as, I've been my own contractor for X amount of years, and here's all the amazing stuff that I've done in that time. And that makes you look a little more put together, as in you're sort of have your own thing going, rather than trying to section it off. And you can do this even if you're doing a lot of contracting with agencies like Creative Circle or Vitamin T or Aquent. You can kind of take the clients that you worked for those organizations and do sort of more of a client list and who are you as a contractor, et cetera, in that space, rather than having to kind of separate. So the point is, don't lie, right? But do figure out how to tell your story in a way that makes sense, in a way that is clean and precise about what it is that you are doing. You can see at the bottom, I have my calendly.com. So if any of you want to talk a little bit further, especially for those of you who are having a career pivot, it can be very hard to figure out how to tell your story about your previous life and how to translate that into your future life. When I got my master's and started over again, I went from being a director from 7 years to being an analyst for Walt Disney. But my point is in that space, I, since I was an analyst for Disney to now, I've climbed that ladder in under 5 years to get back up to a director level role. So it is possible, and you may not have to start at the beginning like I had to, but I didn't have anyone to help me figure out what my story was. But now I can tell you what it is. And basically my career is all about digital transformation. From the time I was in the news industry until now, I have done nothing but help companies transform themselves and find their story in a digital environment. And that's sort of how I tell my story from then to now. Took me 2 years to figure it out, but I got there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and shut this down, and then we can take Let's see. We can take some questions. All right. Wow. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on over here. All right.
I can help to parse through it. I've been like reading through it and also responding to some. So I think one that would maybe apply to a lot of people. One that I thought was really great. Could you give some examples of ways to communicate impact without hard measurements? So if you don't have like quantitative numbers to show, like how do you still communicate impact?
Yeah. I mean, it is tough, but I think depending on what you were doing, right? So let's say what you did impacted like the studio that you were in. You can talk about how, if this brag point was something that helped develop you guys as a team, or brought camaraderie, or created a trusted relationship across a stakeholder. Those are softer things, right? So these are examples of things that you can use, developing, being a trusted advisor, evangelizing, bringing your team together, or even like if the work, I'm trying to think of an example of like something specific that you may not then have like a measurement for.
While you're thinking, I have a thought on that.
Great.
I think that's a really good question, and it's kind of related to the work that I do, and I think, Stephanie, as you were talking about like soft skills, I think especially in today's world when everything is digital, especially right now, soft skills are just like, people don't realize how important they are. And so I think that if you're able to talk about something in terms of you were able to have like facilitate a culture shift within an organization or within with your client, I think that's a huge thing that you can point to that maybe you can't quantify. But if, for example, let's say that you are on a user research project and the client doesn't actually want to do user research, or they don't see the value of it, or they think that they already know what the user wants, which we see all the time, right? So of course, you can jump straight into saying, you can just say, I worked on this project and I conducted all these user research interviews and I found all this stuff. But what about that in-between piece of how did you go from convincing someone that didn't care for it to actually letting them actually allow you to do the research and like convincing them that that was important. So that's a really important piece that you can't necessarily quantify, but that actually shows huge impact for your ability to persuade someone of the importance of user research and just be able to continue to do good work. So that's one example, especially with research, that I think a lot of people experience and is a great thing to put on your resume.
Yeah.
I think also a lot of the work we do is about like client satisfaction and metrics that are more qualitative. And so finding ways to describe, how the user's current state was changed in the future state by, saving them time or making them more effective, or, all of the you may not have metrics about how much time they're saving, but you can still, you can still impact if you've done usability, if you've done, follow-up research, you can still speak to how it's changed their process.
Also, in the chat bot, I put an article in there for everybody called The 6 Ways to Measure the Impact of Your Service Design Efforts. This one is a little more technical. It goes a little bit more back to KPIs than the more soft skills that Chanin and Radhika were talking about. But it does actually help provide some insight for you guys to be able to read through what these kinds of measurements or impacts could look like, and how you might be able to talk to them in different ways that are a little bit easier to measure, that aren't so necessarily number heavy. If that makes sense. So there's some interesting stuff in there for you guys to consider.
Another question was, it's kind of technical, but any recommendations on the type and size of fonts for resumes? And I had some thoughts on that too.
I'll let Radhika go take this one. I hire designers to do that for me. So the answer from me is no.
I have some thoughts on that. So
I do too.
yeah, okay, cool. So in terms of resumes, like I think that I don't honestly think that people like print out resumes as much and like look at them. So with that, if you were gonna go for print, you would need to think about probably 12-point font or more. But now that most people are looking at things on their screen, I would actually say I think all the fonts, the main like descriptions and everything on my resume, it's 10-point fonts, which is, if for print, it's probably small. And I think for digital, I range between like 8 to 10. And so you have some flexibility there. So 8 to 10-point font, I would say. For headings and everything, you have flexibility to make it a little bit bigger. But for the like bulk of your resume, where it's actually like the descriptions and everything, I would say staying between 8 to 10 makes sense. And then also I posted a response to one person's question about, if you're a researcher, does your resume actually need to be well designed? And also kind of combining an answer to both those questions. Mm-hmm. Whether or not you're a designer, your resume should still be easy to read, easy to skim, and not be visually confusing for the reader. So there's a lot of different ways you can do that, using hierarchy, using contrast, typography, font size, of course, is related to that, but and then of course white space. So there's a lot of different little design techniques that you can use, even if you're not a designer, that can make your resume stand out and also just make it easier to read.
Yeah, I agree that. I agree with some of the comments being put down by Pamela Hardy. In terms of font size, I think I agree that like no one's printing this except for maybe yourself. And if you're printing it, then you want to, you don't want it to look too huge or too small. So you want it to probably be about like, 8, I would say like 9 to 10 to like a 12 might be a little bit big, but it depends on the font. It all depends on the font you've chosen, and whether it's sans serif or serif, all of that goes into so obviously you should be if you're designing it yourself and you are unfamiliar with typographic best practices, then look those up, because those are things that you may be asked to apply to your role, even if you're not a visual designer. More and more, as we sort of talked about in the beginning, employers are looking for unicorns, people who have not only like UX research and UX, interaction design abilities, but also some level of visual design acumen. And so just having some basic idea of like, on a PDF, it's okay to go much smaller because they can zoom in, things like that. It all depends on, what form it's taking and how you expect it to be interacted with. Yes, and don't forget letting in kerning, very, very, very important.
Thanks, Pam.
I posted a link that says like design for non-designers, but also highly recommend a book that actually is by the same title. It's called Design for Non-Designers, and I think there's probably like a PDF online version somewhere. But highly, highly recommend it for those that are thinking about all these things of, I'm not a trained designer, I don't really understand it, but I want my resume to stand out, and I have a lot of content, so how do I make it more easily accessible? Highly recommend that book and the tips that are in it, because it's great.
Let me address one more question, because there was a couple of questions on this before I hand it over to Portfolio Space. There was some questions on here about resumes that, for those of you who don't have very much experience or are coming right out of school. Orphans and widows too. I'll let them talk about that in a second. So for those of you that are coming out of school, you have a couple of options. You can do two kinds of resumes. One is a skills-based resume, which is extraordinarily unique and a little bit different. I actually do have an example somewhere. So if you ping me separately, I can sort of upload an example of what a skills-based resume might look like. it sort of takes the years of experience, et cetera, out of the mix and focuses more on what skills and capabilities you have. So it kind of tricks the recruiter into ignoring the fact that you don't have a ton of experience. But also another approach is to do it by project. Like I assume those of you who are in graduate school have done a lot of projects. And so you can sort of list your project space, and you can sort of brag list about your project the same way that you would your experience. Because I know a lot of people are getting out of school and they may not have done an internship. They may not have any actual real world experience that is relevant to this new kind of work, which means that you should not be applying to anything other than an entry level or a junior level role for the most part. And they would expect that you don't have a ton of experience. And so it's about showcasing the right kind of portfolio, which Chanin and Radhika will talk about in a minute, but also being able to explain your role, the action you took, the impact or the outcome that you had, and the impact it had in that space. So, just continue to remind yourself of that structure as you even talk about what you were doing on these projects. I'm going to sort of hand it off to Chanin at the moment, unless you guys have anything else to add specifically about resumes.
Nope.
I don't have any question or like anything else to add to resumes. There was one other question that I thought might be relevant. It looks like it came up a couple times.
Okay.
I'm seeing people talk about like, how do you differentiate between UX research, UX design? If you're a student and you're like applying for projects or like jobs in the beginning, you don't have too much to pull from on your resume. Like, how do you handle that? I think I just like see a lot of similarity between those questions. So kind of just like quickly to answer those questions, I would definitely recommend that if you're a student or even if you have pivoted careers and you've done 15 years of this other career and you just became a UX designer, one thing that I want to mention there is that all of your skills really can translate well to UX design. And I think that's just like a beautiful thing that I love about this field in general, is that no matter what you did before, there's some element of you probably did research, you probably did stakeholder interviews, you probably did some sort of explaining or project scoping that relates to UX design. So I highly recommend, thinking about your past skill sets, whether you're a student and you worked on a specific project at school, how those skills translate into the job you're applying for. Or if you're a career, you pivoted careers, you can think about the skills in your last career and how they relate to UX design. So I would also say, like, in addition to, building your resume, if you're a student or you're new in the space, pick up pro bono work. And that can literally be like doing research about your mom's garden and like how it grows, why it is the way it is. Like, I don't know, like you can really research anything to kind of experiment with it. And then you can, of course, move into like having clients and doing all of that. And of course, I hate to tell people to do pro bono work. So if you don't want to do that, don't do it. But like find maybe nonprofits that need some help that you can do for like at a reduced price, or just people in need. Like there's always smaller organizations, nonprofits, community organizations that need tech help or need research that just don't have the funding for it. So there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of contribute your skills while growing your skill set and also adding to your resume.
And your portfolio.
In your portfolio, yes.
And just some thoughts for you guys in terms of what to search for. That was another thing I wanted to talk about, like jobs and what to search for. You'll see like UX, right? UX researcher, UX designer, UX strategist. You'll also see service designer, design strategist, design researcher. You might see design thinker. You might see, anyone else have any other thoughts about keywords for jobs or like titles?
Visual designer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some visual design roles that also include UX.
Experience
sure.
researcher.
Which one?
Experience researcher.
Experienced researcher. Yep. So like, don't be afraid to play with the terminology or the vocabulary that you're using in your word search when looking. Yep. UX, UI. Oh, interaction designer is another one. I did see this UX architect is a weird thing that is actually
So
current.
that usually means more like information architects, but
That's what I
some
thought.
people use it differently.
Right. Like I'm in actually an architect role right now, but I'm in no way an IA at all. So like I found that a little strange, but yes. Yeah, UX, UI generalist, UX engineer. I haven't heard that one before. Applied ethnographer, anthropologist. Yeah, I could see that.
Ooh.
That's an interesting, I haven't heard of that one before.
Product designer. Product is definitely, you must have the visual design skill set as well as the UX design skill set.
Yeah.
For product design.
Yeah, I typically avoid, there's a lot of these that I avoid because I don't have the visual design background to kind of back a lot of this stuff. But yeah, so I agree, like in terms of like UX designer versus UX researcher, especially at junior, mid-level, and senior roles, a lot of them have a lot of overlap in terms of what the expectations are. So for like researchers and strategists, you may not, if you don't have the wireframing or visual design skill of some of the others, then you want to look for more like service design or design strategy roles, or like this one that says applied ethnographer, anthropologist, or general researcher roles or UX researcher roles. So you'll see some of that too. Yeah, I know. There's a comment here. There are so many people writing job descriptions that don't really use the right terminology for the outcomes they're looking for. And not only that, but there's so many freaking recruiters out there that have no idea what you're talking about when you come into an interview too. So remember, that's a thing to remember. When you interview, know your audience, right? Your recruiter is going to be looking for buzzwords from the job description. So only talk about sort of the job description stuff with your recruiter. When you're talking to somebody who's actually hiring manager, who actually is knowledgeable about what you're doing, then you might go into a little bit more detail, but watch the amount of buzzwords and kind of terms that you use when you're just in the initial stage of getting to know your recruiter. Yeah, I don't know about the developer. I haven't seen a lot of that yet, but everybody wants a unicorn in terms of like now they're adding developer responsibilities. They want you to know HTML and blah, blah, blah. Unicorn is a unicorn. Everyone wants it. There's just not that many out there. So eventually you have to remember, most companies, they put out an entire list of what they're looking for, and they typically hire someone who has 60 to 80% of the skills that they've asked for. So just remember, if you have 60 to 80% of what they want, you are still capable of applying. So don't hesitate to apply. If you don't put your hat in the ring, you can't get a job. All right, on to you guys.
Yeah. Sorry, just add one more thing to that. This is it. I just love this topic and I'm really passionate about it. I just was gonna say also, you don't have to be a unicorn. Like, I think it's like this special thing that everyone's like, oh my God, if you are, that's cool. And like, it'll make you more marketable and everything. But there's so many companies that look for specialists. And so if that's the path you want to go, if you want to specialize in something, then do it. But don't feel, I think a lot of designers feel the pressure to be like, oh no, I have to learn how to code, but I hate it and I don't want to do it. And so if you hate it, then don't do it. And you don't have to learn it. You don't have to be a unicorn. If you want to, then go for it. But like, also don't feel pressured by the industry to like know it all, because nobody knows it all.
Yeah, I don't like.
And ultimately, I was going to tag on to that. I was going to say, like, ultimately, it's better to do, a handful of things really well and go really deep on them than be have the full matrix of UX spectrum skill sets and not do any of them very well,
right,
or just do one of them particularly well, because you want to be able to do really well at what you are
right.
purporting to offer.
Yeah, like I can pull a workshop out of my butt in 2 seconds. I can design and facilitate workshops on the fly. I can, I know a ton of frameworks and tools and methodologies. But if you ask me to sit down and create 10 wireframes in Figma or XD or in, whatever, in Sketch, I'm just going to cross my eyes. Like, it's not my space. It's not what I like to do. But like anything that is a methodology or a process or a strategy, I got you.
Okay, so I could start while you're looking to pull it up. So basically, I frame this in terms of the portfolio. Obviously, you've got to have a portfolio to get a design job. It's it demonstrates just as much as your resume. It demonstrates your skills and abilities, and really, I think what most managers are looking for, and what I've generally looked for in doing portfolio reviews, is how someone thinks about a problem. So I think you want to keep that in mind. It's not just, look at the flashy thing that I was part of, or the beautiful end product that was built at the end of the day by the team I was a part of, but I thought through the process in like in this logical way, and that led to these results. So in terms of like do's and don'ts, so I have about 7 UX do's. There we go. Thank you.
Welcome.
And next one, 2 ahead. Thank you. Okay, so one back.
Okay, this one. Got it.
Sorry. Yep. So in terms of do's, I think it's really important to do a number of things. Obviously, you want to showcase a diversity of case studies. I'll go into each of these a little bit in more detail. Display your process. Be specific about your role and what your contributions were as opposed to the rest of the team. Showcase like storytelling abilities. Showcase IA and information architecture skills. As a UXer, those are going to be pretty basic and pretty important for you to understand. Incorporate interactivity where it makes sense, and then include links to view more. So if you want to go to the next one. So I would recommend highlighting 3 to 5 case studies that cover the full range of the UX or human-centered design process from discovery through implementation. So if at all possible, you want to be able to fill in all of the phases of the design process. So if you're just a UX, I shouldn't say that. If you're a UX researcher and not an interaction designer or full UX designer, and you just focus on research, then you're going to want to obviously show the different types of research. So you're going to want to show, an instance where you've helped with discovery research, an instance where you've led, ethnographic research, an instance where you've worked on quantitative versus qualitative, another one where you did usability. So you want to just show that diversity of work samples. So here you can see, like in the example, I'm showing, essentially a number of stages of design from like discovery through deployment. And if you have one, it's very rare to have one example or one work case study that covers the full gamut. But if you can piece together examples that do cover, that do cover each step collectively, then that's still a really great, portfolio. So you want to sort of contrast and complement. Next one. Display process imagery. So the key thing is show how you got there. Use synthesis and workshop photos. Use whiteboarding. Use hand-drawn sketches. It seems like a lot of people on the call are UX researchers. So something like what I've shown here, where you're showing a synthesis in a you know, a non-remote environment would work for a lot of case studies. You can also use, if you do it all digitally now, you could use mural screenshots. So you're going to want to show the different steps that you took to get there, and it's okay if it's a hand-drawn sketch. It's okay if it's imperfect and it doesn't like exactly align with what the finished product looks like. That's all part of the process that's assumed and expected. Next slide. So be specific about your contributions. Similar to what Steph said, brag. You want to highlight your individual contributions as opposed to everyone else on the team. So make it clear, you know, what your role was and what that entailed, and sort of contrast. Don't use we. Essentially, it's, you know, it's great to be modest. It's great to display modesty in like interpersonal, you know, communications, but not in this regard. Don't use we. Okay. Showcase narrative storytelling skills. So I think for a case study, and I'm showing an example of a case study where I get some of, this is from an old portfolio. I'm actually unable to show my current portfolio because it's password protected for another reason that we get into later. But basically, you want to show each of these items, you know, the basic client details, problem statement, your role in the project, what the rest of the team looks like, who else you worked with. If you were an interaction designer and you worked with a visual designer, if you're a UX researcher and you worked with an interaction designer, if who else was there to complement your skill set, if you worked with a lead, if you worked with a creative director, and so forth. Time frame of the project, the process that you used, and obviously that's not going to be like a line bulleted item. That's going to be a narrative sort of thing. So that's where you can really use your storytelling capabilities. You want to highlight research insights, so not just the observations that you sort of collected, but the insights that those led to. And then really important is highlighting setbacks and challenges. It may seem counterintuitive, but it's really important to show that there were real world constraints to your project. So whether that's, you know, feedback from a professor or a constraint from a professor that a project meets certain criteria, or whether, you know, you could only interview people through guerrilla research for a particular project, that sort of thing. You want to lay out what those constraints were and how you responded to them. And then similar to what Steph was saying in terms of outcomes, you want to elaborate on how the solution impacted both users and the business, if applicable. So obviously the users were user experience designers. And if you've worked in a professional setting, then you want to talk about the business side as well. And then lastly, what you learned. So what did you take away from the experience? Next slide. So this is not a great example, so I kind of use it as like a don't do what I did. But you want to showcase your information architecture skills and make it easy to navigate and consume. The reason this is not a great example is because, well, mobile and responsive, you're going to find a lot of overlap. This is an example from a long time ago, not a long, but, you know, long enough ago that mobile was one thing and responsive was like new and bright and shiny. So one did not equate the other. But you can see you want to take into account good information architecture principles, make sure someone can find what they're looking for, and you shouldn't, ultimately, this is an example that you shouldn't even come across because you're only showing 3 to 5 case studies. So you shouldn't have this many categories or buckets in your information architecture. So don't follow the role or the example of the picture. Next one is incorporate interactivity. Unfortunately, I I wasn't able to get the animated GIF to come through on the PDF. So normally in my PowerPoint, the little owl, the green and blue owl at the bottom right of the screen actually like starts talking to you. But in general, if you can incorporate like animated GIFs, MP4s, videos of other kinds, things to show interactivity, especially if you're an interaction designer and on the UX spectrum, where you're, creating interactions, it's super important to show, something beyond the static image. And then the last thing is include links to view more. So things like, download your resume, download scrubbed process documentation, if it was for a client, interactive prototypes, links to those like an ActShare or an Envision link, links to live sites if you have them, video demos, things like that. So wherever you can provide more information, do so. And the next and last one, I think, oh, nope, that we're on to don'ts. So the only don'ts, and I don't have a lot of examples for this because it's hard to show what you shouldn't do. And I honestly didn't want to show like examples of bad portfolios because I don't think that's particularly fair. Don't show only finished products. If you show only a, only the website or the product that was completed at the end of your term, no one's going to know how you got there and what part you played in it. If you show only student or personal projects, I think it's important that you, if you can go to 2 slides from here. If you show only student or personal projects, one more, yep. It's key to demonstrate real world constraints and challenges. So if at all possible, do one of the, do one of the pro bono or one of the UX, essentially like volunteering projects that Radhika and others have posted about. Because real world constraints and challenges are really what will set apart your project versus all of the other student projects that an employer may be seeing for an entry-level role. It's important to note the difference because you can make, on a student project, you can often make all of the decisions yourself without a lot of feedback except at the end from your grade, without having to worry about budget constraints or, stakeholders' particular distaste of the color green or just other random things that come up. Things like inability to access users and all the real world constraints that we're working with in real projects. And then don't display all of your work samples. So another bad example from my old portfolio, don't do that. Don't exceed more than 5 case studies because no one has time to look at them, quite honestly. And it's important to note that the people who are reviewing your portfolio want you to capture their attention quickly because they're going to go through it. If you have made it to an interview where they're going to review your portfolio with you, they're going to look at it beforehand, but they're going to expect you to walk them through a lot of these case studies with them present. And they're not necessarily, they're going to spend less time looking at your portfolio than you will hope. It's an unfortunate but sad truth.
Well, even in photojournalism, we were told back in the days of photography, we were told to pick our best 20 to 25 images. Now you can imagine for a 12-year career.
How do you do that?
Yeah, it's hard to pick.
It's very hard.
25 pictures.
Yeah. All right. So the last thing, you can include work protected by NDAs, but how do you do it? So don't include work protected by NDAs. I should say, don't do it without doing one of these things. So one of the things you can do is use a password protected portfolio, which is the route I've gone now. I've actually used all of these. in my current solution. I have a password protected portfolio. I only give the password out when I'm interviewing with a company. I show more process imagery than final non-public information that was the final. And you can also redact, blur out, or just otherwise scrub out client-specific information. So things like you can see here, this is a research synthesis deck. So what do I want in a client mobile app? So it gets I basically replaced the client name with the word client. It gets the point across. So it is more work, but it keeps you from getting sued. And so that is very important. And that's what I have.
Yeah.
So what?
I have a bunch of questions for you from people. So depending if you're ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So I'm going to start with one from Sydney. Give me a second. She said, well, Radhika kind of also answered this, but what platforms or tools do you use to make polished GIFs or videos of final designs?
So to make animated GIFs, I have used, gosh, what did I use? I used Awesome Screenshot, which is a free Google Chrome plugin, but you can use plenty of other things like Snagit has a ability to record video. You can use, trying to think through, depends on how you created the source content, but if it's just an interaction, Figma can do that for you. Could export as a MP4 or a GIF. So can Principal. So it depends on what your source. QuickTime works too. Those are all great ideas.
If you look up, you'll see a question from Sophie Jane, just a couple lines up about where do research projects completed during grad school or a PhD fit on the student real-world spectrum? Projects not completed for grades, but for publication with a team of other academics.
So I think you just want to be really clear about the constraints that you had in place and you want to communicate that through in your interview process and also in your portfolio. So, I'm sure in a thesis presentation, you had a lot of constraints, time being one of them. If there were other things, I guess I'm less familiar with the PhD level UX work and more in the professional sphere, but yeah, I would just be clear about what constraints you did respond to and what challenges you faced.
I think a project for publication is pretty close to what I would consider client work. So
that's nothing that's certainly nothing to scoff at, certainly. If it's for publication.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would sort of consider it more actual, like, a research-based project that is for like professional purposes rather than a student project, in my opinion.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider that a student project either.
Yeah,
if it's published. And it sounds like you have lots of constraints, so that's good.
We have, what platforms and tools can I use to create an online portfolio?
So if you're creating a web portfolio, there's plenty of good tools out there for, obviously if you aren't a coder and you aren't, building it from scratch or anything like that, there are plenty of other options like Squarespace is one that I like. WordPress is good, but you have to update it a lot, and it can have a lot of security vulnerabilities. Behance I see as an example there. I don't know that Behance gives you the flexibility to really build out full case studies. It's more just imagery. If you can figure out a way to build out a full case study with like lots of narrative, then go to it. But yeah, Squarespace and Wix are examples. And you'll find plenty of tools out there where you can just pick a template, make sure it's responsive, make sure that it's, you know, works on multiple devices, and just use a template that they provide. And you can also use Adobe. Gosh, I'm so like not in the Adobe world anymore.
It's okay. They're sharing a lot of stuff on the.
They're sharing lots of them. Okay, Adobe Spark, yeah.
Yep. Real fast to Chris. The answer is yes. There is a thing as too long of a case study.
Yes.
You definitely want to keep your projects succinct. Yeah, and to the point. I even went so far as to recommend to somebody that think about it like you're telling a story, like a comic book strip, and you should like kind of have like, what is your introduction? What are like the climax pieces that really matter? And then what is your sort of like, you know, solution at the end? Because when you're talking to those recruiters, I know not all of you are expert facilitators or expert storytellers, but this is a good chance for you to get that experience to learn how to tell a story that doesn't bore the people to tears, right? So like the problem is sometimes I'm sitting here and listening to people talk through their stuff and I'm just like, but yeah, so like take a minute and kind of, you know, a good way to look at good storytellers is listen to TED Talks, right? These people know how to tell stories. Find someone who's really good at telling a story and figure out how, and then, you know, use that idea of a comic book. Like, you know, like those things are very, you know, succinct and to the point. So figure out how to like, what are the main pieces that you would tell of the story? It goes back to your brag. What are your brag points of the story that you're trying to tell, and keep it short. Don't overdo it.
There's also a question about personas. Personas are great like artifacts to include. You mentioned, is it okay to include them if my users are okay with me using their pic? So for personas in general, people would expect them not to have imagery of actual real world users, because otherwise they would just be like bios. So for a persona, an archetype, a mindset, you're going to want to probably anonymize the information in terms of like showing a stock photo that doesn't look particularly cheesy, or an avatar, something like that. But personas are a great artifact to include if you have them, absolutely. Same with like sitemaps or other information architecture documentation, you know, process flows, things like that.
Sorry, just to quickly button here, can I maybe quickly turn their actual photo into a sketch or an artist sketch?
Yeah.
That's fine. That'll work. Okay.
I would just like anonymize it a little so that it's,
I'd love to try and move on to Radhika to give her a chance. I know we're getting kind of close to the 7:24 time frame, so I'd like to get her on board to give a shot. Shannon, do you have anything else to wrap up your portfolio?
Nope.
Awesome.
Nope.
Thank you so much. That was extraordinary.
Cool. Thank you. Well, so I don't have any slides to present or anything. I just have a couple portfolios pulled up that I thought I could share in terms of good examples of what portfolios look like. And they're pretty broad. Some of them are developers, some of them are designers, a lot of the designers in the industry that I follow are also big like into public speaking, and I follow them because that's something that I'm also passionate about. So there's some portfolios that really focus in on like public engagement and like speaking opportunities too. So with that, I can maybe like share my screen. But also actually maybe before I jump into that, I saw one question for someone that's kind of asking about like the nitty-gritty.
Bugs are gonna crawl in your hair. Yeah.
And so it's kind of a longer question from Jennifer. What format do you recommend using for constructing a portfolio? Does it need to be like one-page summaries or screenshots or like a presentation? And like simply put, I would say, think about your portfolio as a presentation of your work. So if you're going to talk about your work, if you're going to put someone through a presentation, would you have them scroll through like a 3-page Word document, or would you actually present it like a slide deck? And the answer should be present it like a slide deck. And so in that way, I would highly recommend, you know, if you're going to do a PDF portfolio, try to make it more like a presentation, especially if you're going to share it with someone and they're going to go through it on your own. You want to, again, make it as easy as you can for them to go through it and absorb that information. Okay, so that being said, these are all people that I know in DC and that I'm kind of familiar with, so I just am kind of using them as examples. I know that we had talked briefly about using Behance as a portfolio website, or like just a portfolio in general. So I wanted to just highlight like one really talented designer that I know that's actually done that. And I think Behance kind of meets her needs for where she is in her career. But I would also just say that maybe this won't work for everyone. So this is just one example. But I think that Behance kind of offers you, like, if you really kind of want to showcase how your designs are appreciated by community, or like, you know, if you have a lot of project views or appreciations or followers, like, I do think that that is something that could help you. So like, if you're just really into Behance and you have a lot of work up here, I think that using this or listing this on your portfolio could be helpful. But so my friend Pim, she has kind of done a couple examples of video work as well as just visual design and illustrations. And so she kind of has the video here and then has a description here. And now for a case study, I would say that this is kind of an okay length. But then when you go into thinking about like visual hierarchy and headings and all of that stuff, and like being specific about the work that you did, there's kind of like, there's definitely room for improvement here where you can have more headings and like kind of be more specific about the work that's done. So in that way, maybe Behance doesn't offer that, but I would say that like, if you're being really simplistic or minimal about your work, Behance is a really great way to kind of just showcase a lot of your different work kind of at the same time, and then also kind of build community that way as well. So that's one option. And then another colleague of mine, her name's Raquel. She's a really amazing designer as well as big into public speaking. And she's definitely further along in her career. So I would say she's maybe 6 to 7 years into her design career, and also has worked at a lot of different like big places and has spoken in a lot of bigger places as well. So her portfolio and her website, as you can see, it's very minimal. And I think that that is okay when you get to a certain level of your career. But I just want to mention here that, you know, as you gain more expertise and as you build your career, your resume, your portfolio, as Shannon mentioned, you don't need to include every single thing that you've ever done. And you should definitely take the time as you build your career or as you build your portfolio to then retire work that maybe doesn't serve you or doesn't even reflect your skill set now. So this is Raquel's website portfolio, and she has mainly just a paragraph here that talks about her work and links to the different work that she's done, as well as linking to her LinkedIn and like other social links as well. So this is, again, it's like so minimal, but you can afford to kind of do this the further along you are in your career, and especially if you pick up like more skill sets or different things other than just like the one lane of design. So another portfolio here that I think is really strong, Sabrina Hall is, as you can see, an art director, designer, and also does a lot of work in the inclusion and accessibility space. And so I wanted to showcase her career because I thought it did showcase her portfolio because I thought it was a great example of, you know, when you have a lot of different things that you've done, whether that's visual design, website design, but then also maybe you have a blog or maybe you're speaking. If you have a lot of different things to showcase, there's different ways that you can kind of break that down and turn it into kind of like consumable information. So you're not overloading the viewer. And so this is kind of just an example of how she's laid out her different work. Of course, an image and then like a title is helpful. But again, it's pretty minimal. It's not overloading the viewer. It's not talking specifically about even who the client was at that time. And so I just thought this was like a really great like first page. And then when you click on the work, I thought that she kind of did a good job of highlighting the different work that she did. So it's kind of like you can have a summary at the top, what you did, and then the role that you had, and then an image or just more descriptors. And so I thought that this was just a good example of, she has measurable goals here, more images, and really has just broken up the content to tell the story of the work that she has done. So I think that's really a great example. Again, even showing the differences and how the design work that you've done appears in different spaces is always helpful. Desktop versus mobile, or if it's print work, like actually showing it printed somewhere, or even just putting it into one of those mock-ups where you can pretend like it looks like it's printed. So that's always helpful to show your work in different spaces. And then, as I mentioned, she has lots of different things here. There's her digital work, but then there's also the writing that she's done, kind of linking to that as well, and then speaking. And so one thing that I would mention is that speaking opportunities are also a really great way of improving your skill set and showing what you know. So I would highly recommend also, if anyone is interested in public speaking, whether that's at your local meetup, or now something like this where you're just sharing information via webinar or talking about something that you're familiar with. Public speaking is a really great way of showcasing on your portfolio and on your resume that you know what you're talking about, and that you are kind of helping with community building and sharing knowledge as well. And I would say that's another way to kind of help you to stand out. So if you want to grow your public speaking career, that's really awesome. And you can kind of just list all the places that you've spoken at as another way to kind of showcase the work that you're doing to show that you are not only a skilled designer, but can also teach it and talk about it. Another is this woman named Tatiana Mack, and I highly, highly, highly recommend you look her up, you follow her on Twitter. She's amazing. She also is a really amazing engineer who has done a lot of work in the diversity and inclusion space. And so she not only is an engineer that's building products, but also talks about the ethics of those products, how you use development and engineering to make sure that these products and technologies are fully accessible to different types of stakeholders. And she talks about that a lot. She does public speaking opportunities, but she also writes about it a lot. And so this is again another person that's kind of further along in their career, but she has a lot of, I think, just visually interesting ways of kind of showcasing what she's done. So something I really like here is that, of course, she has this one-line sentence, but this piece right here, a designer scratched out, but an engineer who codes, a writer who reads, a speaker who listens. I think that that's also your website and your portfolio offers you a little bit more space to kind of be creative in how you define who you are. So I think that that's just another example of you can be creative in how you describe yourself. Of course, if you're applying for a UX design job and you want to make it super clear that you're a UX designer, you can of course just put UX designer there. But if there's other things that you're passionate about that relate to that position or relate to that role, you of course can kind of include that there too. So I also just really appreciate the visual design of her portfolio. She kind of has selected things on the first page of this is one example of something that I wrote. Here's a couple more examples. And then she also just kind of links to the different things as well. So I just, really like her portfolio in general. Yeah, and then this is another colleague, Johanna, that I know of. So this is a person that's actually, this is a perfect UX example of a portfolio, I think. So her portfolio is really strong because it talks about, jumps into write about what she does, a short description, but also makes it easy and quick to see, this is the work that I do, this is where I do it. And I also really appreciate that she's kind of right up here written the different clients that she's worked with. She's also has kind of where she studied and then a little bit about her. And you can also kind of click on these different things to see like more about her work. And so I think it's just a really straightforward portfolio. It's only like one page, but you kind of get through all the details. And again, I just think it's like a very straightforward example of a UX portfolio in a UX website. So of course I was like, I have to show my own just to like give some examples. So this is also I will say that I haven't updated my website in a while. So it's a bit out of date, but I think that the kind of the elements of it are still relevant to the conversation. And so kind of the way that Chanin was talking about including case studies and, you know, picking the best work. So the way that I've kind of laid out my portfolio is that I have just a couple examples of things that I'm proud of and things that I worked on recently. And the way that you can, again, it's kind of simply put, you just see what it is. And I've actually listed like the skills that I use here too. And then here, it's a module that kind of opens and I'm able to go over, you know, this is a brief summary of it. These were the different roles that I played on it. And then this is how I did all those things. So again, breaking up all the content with images is really critical, and being able to speak to, you know, in this role, I did these different things. And, you know, I talk about like a challenge here, who I worked with, and then of course having live links. If it's a live website that you design to, always great to put that in. And so that's kind of just one example there. Another aspect is that I do a lot of public speaking as well. So I've kind of just listed that out. Again, having as many images as you can, I think is always going to help your case. And then of course, if there's videos of the work that you did or anything else that you can link to, always great to do that. And then my website, so for the record, so I do have experience with coding, but again, it's kind of like, it's just hard to do that all the time. And so this is a Bootstrap theme that I have then built through GitHub. And I actually, like if anyone's familiar with GitHub and GH pages, it's pretty easy to kind of build a website, customize some stuff, and then throw it up on GH pages. So that's a little bit of technical talk there, but if anyone has interest in coding or wants to do that, this is actually a really easy way of doing that. So I did not build this theme from scratch. There's plenty of themes out there that you can just take and then customize for your own needs. So in addition to using, of course, you can use WordPress, you can use all those different content management systems, but if you're interested in coding, you can just find Bootstrap themes that exist, and all you have to do is customize the content. So that's how I've created my portfolio. And it has like a little module for your resume here. So I've kind of just done that here. And then of course you can download that too. And then I just have my About Me. So this is just Parallax website, like single page. It's pretty simple, but there's, again, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. And then this is a colleague, Kim, who is a designer in DC, and I really like her portfolio because it showcases a lot of different things. You know, she's using GIFs and animations, and it has all that here. But again, you can kind of click on it, and in a similar way to mine and the other ones you saw, there's just a bit more of an explanation and kind of showcasing all the different types of work that she did and the different forms that it took. So I really like that. Oops. Yeah, and then another colleague of mine, Joy Witt, they are a really amazing data visualization person and civic tech organizer. And so they just have, I think the way that they've done this work is really interesting because they just have like 3 examples right here, but it really like covers the breadth of their knowledge. And so you can click on interactive data visualizations and it has, you know, more work here that you can then individually drill down on. But another thing that Joy is really involved with is organizing in DC for the creative community, as well as like technologists in general. And so another thing that you can say, that you can always put on your portfolio is, are you helping to mentor people? Are you working on community building efforts? Are you helping to organize events or anything like that? Like that absolutely can belong in your portfolio, because it's another example of showcasing how you're using your skills to not only just do the work, but to go beyond it. And so Joy has organized Tech Lady Hackathon, which is a really awesome hackathon series that takes place every year in DC. And so they've just kind of talked about how they've organized and the different pieces that went into it, and also again showed images, which are always great. And then lastly, I wanted to show Allie's portfolio, another colleague in the area. And so she's a front-end engineer that does a lot of different types of work. And so her portfolio actually is just an example of how you kind of can list out all the work that you've done, but still have it be easily consumable, easy to read and everything. So it's just like she has the name and then the paragraph below. And again, you can click on it to then explore more. And so what I really liked here is that very simply put, she's just written, these are the different roles that I played, and then this is the different tools and technology I use. And I think as designers and developers, this is a super helpful thing to put, because oftentimes employers are going to be looking for, we need someone to build this thing using HTML, CSS, JavaScript, or I need someone to build a thing in Sketch and Abstract, or, they'll be looking for your experience with specific tech products too. So very simply put, you can just kind of list it there without going into the nitty gritty of, I did all this stuff in React, or I made 1 million wireframes in Sketch. You can just simply put, have it right there, and it can be really great. So that being said, I think that's kind of all of the portfolio examples that I wanted to go over. Really quickly, I was also just going to show my resume really quick, kind of related to, I have a couple resumes that I was going to show kind of related to the conversation there as well. So of course, I'll just kind of start with my own resume to kind of paint a picture here. But definitely fully agree with everything that Chanin and Steph have said. With my resume, what I've really focused on is I've kept it very simple, black and white. And also, if anyone is interested in this template, I actually have created a shareable version. So we can maybe share that out with everyone afterwards. It's a template in Sketch. But really the main things that I have here are that the simplest elements are that I have headings and then the relevant information underneath. So the main headings that I like to feature are, of course, experience, and that's where you can list the role that you have, the place that it was, the dates, and then a short description. And I actually have opted to the paragraph model where it's just sentences instead of bullets. And I find that that's been a really big help in terms of saving space. And so that's why I've opted to do that, having 2 to 4 sentences in your description that go over the work that you've done. And then also I care deeply about my speaking engagements and kind of my community involvement. So I also put that kind of right at the top to showcase the different work that I've done there. I also have volunteer work here and my education. And also I will just say, in my experience so far, no one has ever asked me about my education. No one has ever in like a interview or anything like that, no one has ever been like, where did you go to school, or what's your official training in this and everything like that, because in this field I really think the work kind of speaks for itself. So I've seen traditionally that people kind of put the education right at the top, but in my experience I keep it at the bottom because I don't see it as the most important thing. Of course you want to put it on there, you don't want to leave it off, but I think that the top of your resume is the most valuable real estate. And so you want to try to put the most eye-catching things at the top. That's kind of just my motto of how I do it.
I do have to say, I pipe in for that not all places, but definitely there is in some circles, like SCAD that has a big name. And so I keep SCAD at the top of my resume, because even today had an interview for a, bigger role, and like the first thing out of his mouth was, oh, you went to SCAD, or like, I know other people from SCAD, or I've worked people from SCAD. So in some instances it is beneficial, depending on who you know. But like she said, where you went to school doesn't always matter. It doesn't matter what degree you come from. What matters is, what does your portfolio look like, and what is the experience that you have to offer.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and so my resume is 2 pages because I do a lot of speaking and teaching. And so for me, I definitely want to like include that in here. And so mine is kind of 2 pages for that reason. But again, it doesn't have to be, and you can kind of decide, based on your experience and your engagements, if you want to keep it 1 to 2 pages. So that is my resume. Another quick example that I wanted to show actually was, this is someone that I actually knew from college, so it's quite old of a resume, but I really liked it because I thought it was a very interesting way of showcasing the different work that's been done. So up here in the top left corner, they've kind of creatively written their website, like highlighted in yellow, but through that, they've kind of listed maybe their characteristics, the things they're interested in, and kind of gone about it that way. And also, I thought this resume is a really great way of showcasing how you can use white space and how you don't need to fill up every single portion or every single corner of it. So this is a pretty simple resume, but I think that the way that they have included, they have objective, they have their experience, they have not only the work that they did, but also room for descriptions. And then this was like a visual artist, so they actually did exhibitions in a couple of different places. And then they also have skills recognition awards. They even have their references on here. So it's just like, in one resume, it's kind of surprising how much they've actually put on here, including references and exhibitions and things like that. But this is just an example of how you can kind of use white space to group things differently. And then also here you can see how they've used black text versus gray text, and how that kind of helps with visual hierarchy and being able to read through it. So that's another one. And then lastly, I think this is kind of just like a similar resume to mine, where it's 2 columns, but what they've broken it out into is looking at experience and their work. But then here, what I really like, I think similar to Stephanie's resume, is that they've broken out all these different things. So tools, you can list out what are the design technologies that you know how to use, what are the coding languages you know. You can kind of put all that here. And then also with methodologies, if this list gets really long, then you can of course break it out into, this is UX design, this is research, this is visual design. And you can kind of break all those things out. But having different methodologies or like specific skill sets to point to also helps with people being able to like skim your resume and pull out the main details. And then of course, if you have any honors, if you have any awards, definitely you want to list that, and then education here as well. So that, I think, is everything for like my presentation and my screen share. But I saw the chat popping off, so I can also look at if anyone had any questions or anything about that.
Sorry, I'm muting myself. So I think that there was a lot of thank yous for our time and effort. There were some questions about like your resume and portfolio being a part of your brand, if you want to kind of chat on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. Of course, if you're creating if you want to create a unified presence, you definitely want to create a unified brand. And I'll just be humble and say this. I honestly have not done that. Like, I haven't focused too much on that. I think that you can absolutely do that, and you can devote time to that, and I think it will always help. But I also think there's an element to that, like, it doesn't have to be the most perfect thing that you've ever done. I think that that's oftentimes what puts people, or like maybe keeps people intimidated by certain jobs, or just like afraid to apply for things because they're afraid of perfection. And like, as a reformed perfectionist, I can say this, that I've struggled with that a lot. But just, remembering that you don't have to keep things, they don't have to be perfect, is just kind of my answer to that. But I think branding itself can be simplified. For example, with my resume, I use a specific font, and I use like black and white color blocks. And so that can also easily be translated to a website or to a portfolio. And I used to have a PDF portfolio that did carry the same branding as my resume. So in that way, it is pretty easy to implement. But if you want to introduce color or different typography, you absolutely can kind of keep those two things tied together, whether it's your PDF portfolio or your website or your resume.
There's a couple questions about advice about avoiding double columns, and should you have a PDF and you should probably, if you have the time and you can make a PDF and an online portfolio, it's definitely helpful. But if you had to prioritize, what do you guys think?
I'd say web.
Same. I'd say that too, because it's easier to share out. Like, you can just link to it and have people get to it that way, versus a PDF. Like, you kind of have to be like at a computer, or like it's maybe hard to look at on your phone too. So I would say online portfolio is better. But if that's getting built out and you need something to send in the interim, a PDF is definitely acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as putting graduation dates and years on, I mean, I'm 40, or I'm about 40. I have my graduation dates, both 2003 and 2015, 16, whatever it was. I haven't had any problems with ageism. Now, granted, 40 isn't quite that old yet. But I still have my dates on mine. It doesn't seem to make a difference. So.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think we also should fight ageism. And so I think that there's an element of like, don't hide it. Like, there's nothing to be ashamed of also by putting that, whether you're a recent grad or you graduated a long time ago. Like, so I would just say keep it there, but do what you're comfortable with.
What does ATS stand for?
I think it's some automated like text screener, or I don't know what applicant tracking systems. Not even close.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. I've seen that come up a couple of times, and I was like, I don't know what ATS is. Yeah, there was a comment about the ATS doesn't like the horizontal split of a resume, but I mean,
it's easier to scan for a human, but
yeah.
I mean, I'm not familiar with those. I do know that, if it's one of those things where like you have to upload your resume into a system,
yeah,
totally, it like double column, like column resumes just like mess it up.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I actually don't have too much experience with that.
So Frank says he made ATS adjustments and got 3 times the recruiters, which is great.
okay.
I don't do or necessarily care about that, but also as a director level, I find that most of what I do is networking at this stage. So like that ends up being a bigger part of what I focus on Frank. Also, if you send me some information about ATS, if you have it, if you send it to my krellbydesign@gmail.com account, I can share it out to everybody. But yeah, so I think a lot of this is often networking as well. And so that's a big piece that, we haven't really had a chance to cover. But network, belong to things, right? Like part of this whole thing came out of a Google UX group that I was invited to randomly. Didn't even realize it had 5,000 members. And I just posted about whether or not people were interested in some guidance, and it got a huge response. And so then I posted in adplist.org and SDXD and my LinkedIn profile. And I'm also a part of a bunch of Slack communities. And, you know, Radhika is one of the most connected people I know, and she's great at that. I'm like so about it. It's hard for me to keep up with everything, but you know, definitely start working on your networking and the communities you belong to. And, you know, also just before everyone kind of takes off, before we kind of end things, just a quick one before those of you have to run. Thank you to all of you who came today, not just for being here for the presentation, but for caring enough to be a part of these communities and to belong and, you know, to join in together. So, you know, it's great to see so many of you guys here. And also thank you, Chanin and Radhika. I cannot thank you ladies enough. On a whim, I just texted them and said, hey guys, you want to give a presentation with me? I don't want to do it alone. So
You could have done it alone.
But these guys, I mean, these two ladies, I have to tell you, I can't tell you how many UX designers they have interviewed and gone through resumes and done all of this stuff. These guys are just really fantastic and they know their shit. And I couldn't, you know, I didn't want to sit here and try and give you portfolio advice as much as, you know, I can talk about resumes, I can talk about interviews, I can talk about LinkedIn, I can talk about strategy and interviewing or researching. But when it comes to portfolios, you know, I really, you know, had to defer to these lovely experts, and, you know, they've had amazing experience to share as well. So thank you both so much for your time today and being willing to join in on this endeavor with me. So
Well, thanks everyone for actually listening to us for this long.
Yeah, thank you. It was great connecting. I've already seen some LinkedIn connections come through, but please feel free to connect with all of us on LinkedIn, and I'm sure that we'll probably send an email that just like has some more resources after this too. So stay connected.
yeah, absolutely. Stay connected. Look for those of you who haven't connected on LinkedIn, at least follow one of us so you can, I'll be sharing out the recording and any post data via LinkedIn. So definitely connect there. And you're also very, very welcome. And definitely like check out some of the things that Radhika and Chanin have added. There's meetup groups. There's all kinds of places to connect with your fellow designers. So definitely do that. And I'm going to try and convince these two to join the adplist.org as mentors so they can, I have 40 upcoming mentor meetings, so they can kind of help out in that arena too. So it's a great list. Felix Lee is amazing. James Vinn over at SDXD is amazing. The way that everybody is just trying to really reach out in these communities and connect. So, so kudos to all of you, and just don't give up. You're gonna get there. It's just a matter of time. Okay, so have faith and believe in yourself and keep doing and keep reaching out and keep joining this kind of stuff. And you guys are all going to be great. So thank you.